everyone and welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about my childhood autism symptoms. So let's go ahead and get started.
And trying to remain so strong. I know it's good if I'm wrong. I got it.
So for those of you who don't know, my name is Deanna. I am 29 and live within the UK. I was a late diagnosed autistic and was not diagnosed until last year. So nearly a year ago, it'll be a year this April that I was diagnosed with autism. And I want to talk about my experience with getting diagnosed as having autism, also my childhood symptoms that were missed. So if you're a parent watching this and you think you may have a child who's autistic, then kind of look out for this, especially if they're female, because females definitely do present very, very different to males with autism. I'm going to generalise here because I want to put a little mini disclaimer out there that this is not the experience of every single female autistic or every single male autistic. I'm just going to be very general with like symptoms of male autistics, symptoms of female autistics. I'm going to give you a bit of background as to how I was raised, the sort of background that I have. So I was raised as an only child until I was 5 years old when my younger brother came into the world. I was then raised as the older sibling of one brother until another 5 years later when another brother came into the scene. So I grew up with two younger brothers that were much, much younger than me. I had a much better relationship with the youngest brother. I had a very turbulent relationship with the middle brother. Now that we're all adults, the relationship is all very, very neutral and very, very good between all of us. Still have a bit of a stronger relationship with the youngest, but overall, we are all adults, we're all mature. Just as children, I definitely had a more turbulent relationship with the middle brother than I did the youngest brother. For the youngest brother, I also became almost like a second mum. So I almost gave myself that title, and I would feed him, I would change diapers, as if you're American, change diapers, change nappies. I would help with some of the baby care, and not because mum asked, but because I genuinely wanted to do it. From a young age, I knew that I wanted to be a mum. From a very, very young age, I knew that I had this very idyllic fantasy of how I wanted my adult life to go. It's definitely not gone that way, and that's been something else I want to talk about, is like my idea of what I wanted for life has definitely changed. But let's get into my symptoms. So let's get into a little bit of background in terms of male versus female autism. There is a very big understanding of male autism, and there's a very big lack of understanding for female autism, especially when I was a kid. So I grew up in the 90s. I was born in 1995, so I grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s. There was very little research when it came to female autism. So I think that played a part in my late diagnosis because I also presented very typically like a female autistic. I have gone through some of my symptoms, like my current symptoms, but in general, females tend to present with anxiety, mental health problems, eating disorders, like that sort of thing that's more of an internalized symptom. Whereas males tend to be more outward with their symptoms, tend to be. Obviously, I'm generalizing here. And so because males are more generalized outwardly symptomatic, it then means that they are seen as having more behavioural issues, I suppose. And so therefore it's like, okay, we'll take you to the doctor, we'll go and get you checked, we'll go and get you assessed for autism. Whereas with females, they have so many other different types of issues like eating disorders, anxiety, depression can even play a role in it, overwhelm, all this sort of stuff can play a role in it. And so they get diagnosed with all these other things and not autism. For me, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was 18, and I'm now trying to fight that diagnosis because I was then later diagnosed as being autistic. So I am trying to get the borderline personality disorder diagnosis removed from my record because I never believed I had it, like, at all. Even when I got diagnosed with it, I was like, nah, I think I'm more bipolar than I am, like, BPD. But anyway, I digress. So there is very much a different symptom list, but it all goes and boils down to the core spectrum of autism. I want to go into my symptoms now. So I put bullet points down on a bit of paper because I knew I was going to forget things. So I'm going to generalize, and I'm also going to give examples on it where I can. So the first symptom I had was adults loved me. Adults loved me. Children, not so much, but adults absolutely loved me. I was helpful, I was kind, I was very keen to help. I was very grown up for my age. And I hate using the word grown up because I had such a willingness to help and such a keen, almost like wanting to please people, I suppose, and wanting to, like, I was almost seen as a teacher's pet, and I was seen as a, goody two-shoes and all this sort of stuff, which later is autism. And because I experience this does not mean that you've got autism, by the way. I'm just kind of talking about my experience. So I was very grown up for my age. I was very keen to help. I was always asking for extra tasks from adults. I was always like, I went to church when I was younger. I would take round the biscuits, or I would, if an older lady wanted a cup of tea and she couldn't get up to go and get it because her hands were too shaky, I'd go and get it. I'd say, hey, you want tea? Do you want any milk or sugar in that? Like, I'd always like offer to go and do that. And even down to like, I helped out in Sunday school when I was younger, and I was only about 10 at the time, but I helped out in Sunday school, and I would help other kids at the tender age of 10 when I was still a kid myself. And I feel like I lost out on a lot of my childhood because of that experience. I wasn't given chance to be a child. The second thing I want to bring into this is is around the childhood experiences. So I didn't do imaginary play. And this is a big one when you think of autism and you think of the fact that they can't imagine. I don't really dream. I struggle with imagination. I can manifest and I can think about goals and dreams for the future, but I struggle with imaginary play. And there's a big difference between taking a doll, for example, and this was actually an example that a fellow autistic YouTuber called Sarah Louise, she actually, and I'll leave a link to her channel up on one of the iCards, but she gave this example recently in one of her videos. That was, I took a doll, this is her experience. I didn't necessarily have many dolls, but I kind of did a similar thing to this. She would take a doll and she would put clothes on it because she knew that the clothes went there. Or she would put a stove on a imaginary kitchen because she knew, this is not necessarily her exact experience, by the way, but this is the type of thing she was on about. The fact that she would do things because she knew it happened that way, but not necessarily because she was pretending that the doll was alive. And I definitely relate to the whole, I did not know about the doll being alive, like that sort of thing, like struggling to imagine this doll being alive. But I would do a similar sort of play where I would braid their hair because I knew that hair could be braided. I would sit them down, and I don't even know, no, I wouldn't even do tea parties because I struggled with that imagination. I didn't really play with dolls, even though I did have them. I had a couple of Barbies, I had a few Bratz dolls, I had like a Betty Spaghetti, and I loved braiding the hair of the Betty Spaghetti because it was easy to braid. It was easy to practice the art of braiding. So I was braiding her hair, not because I was like pretending to be the doll and was like, oh, mummy, can you braid my hair? That sort of thing. I was not doing it because of that. I was doing it because I know that hair can be braided, because my mum used to braid my hair every single morning before school because I had really, really long hair. So it was like the act of doing something because I knew it was something that could be done. And that's how I relate to what Sarah was saying, was the fact that you're doing something because you know it's done, not because you're imagining anything being done. Another way that I played when I was younger was I had like this massive box of animals, like this massive box of like just little animal figurines. Like some were big, some were small, some were grey, some were brown, some were like, there was giraffes, there was rhinos, there was dogs, there was cats, there was everything in there. There was like a whole mixed box of like these animals. And I also had a box of like blocks, not like Lego, but like just stacking blocks. And I used to like basically build like a school, like a floor plan of a school with these building blocks. And it was because I was at school at the time. And I used to then take these animals and I used to classify them in a way. So whether it was all the dogs were in one class and like all the rhinos were in another, or whether it was the fact that I would classify them on what age I thought they were. So whether I would take all the very tiny, like in size, like just literally looking at the size of the animal, like whether it was like something that could fit in the palm of my hand. So I would take a look at the actual animal and I would classify it based on how old I thought that animal looked. So if it was small, if it was tiny in my hand, then it would be like a nursery class or a year 1 class. And then if it was slightly bigger, then that would be year 2, like physically and literally looking at that animal and just looking at the size of it. So I wasn't doing it like just to put them in random classes. It was, that one looks like it's about 1 year old. Okay, I'm going to put it in the year 1 class or whatever. Obviously year 1 is not 1 year olds, but like I would classify it based on literally just the look of it. I would pretend to be like, this is the only type of pretend that I would do. But it was more mimicking than pretending, because it was like exact things that were said by my head teacher. So I would put them in like a assembly type thing. I would get them all and I'd like walk them on to like where they would sit. And this is how we did it in school. We had benches, like really tall benches for the year 6s. We had like medium benches for the year 5s. We had I think little chairs for the year 4s, and everyone else sat on the floor. So I made this out of these blocks, and I then walked them all on, got them all to sit down, got them all to walk in, and got them all to, go into this assembly. And then I would be the head teacher, but I would say things that were exactly said to me in one of my assemblies. So I was mimicking, I wasn't pretending. And I think that was a big thing that was misdone. Like my mum would see me playing with these animals and be like, oh, she's pretending. Oh, okay, she's not autistic. Not necessarily the exact thoughts of my mum, but like no warning flags were like raised, because it was pretend. Or it was pretend. It wasn't really pretend. It was mimicking. But, you know, this is kind of like just my specific experiences. So the next thing I've got is I had a very high pain tolerance. I had a very low pain tolerance when I was younger, and then suddenly, almost like overnight after I had my ears pierced, my pain tolerance just gradually got really, really good, to the point where I fell over and I had like an infected wound on my knee. But I would, on my own, I was probably only about 13 at the time, but I would take the plaster off every day. I would wipe it with antiseptic. I would like wipe away all of the infection, all the pus and the goo, and it would sting and it would hurt. But at no point would I sit there and go, ah, and wince or anything like that. No, I would literally just sit there, with my leg up on a table or whatever, so I could see what I was doing, and I would wipe it over with this antiseptic wipe. It would sting. I would then basically take the antiseptic wipe and take out any of the pus that was around, and then I would stick a new plaster on it. I'd do it all by myself, and it hurt, but it wasn't a case of it hurt loads. You know, I wouldn't scream in pain or anything like that. Like there was no response there almost. I don't know where that comes from, but I had a very high pain tolerance, to the point where when I've got tattoos on my wrists, both my wrists. And I've done a tattoo tour, and I'll leave that in the description box down below if you want to see my tattoo tour. But I have got tattoos on my wrists. I've got tattoos on the back of my shoulder. I have got tattoos on my thighs. And I've talked through every single tattoo. I've talked, I've laughed. I've not, like, the only time that I nearly cried was the back of my thigh. So like the flesh that's almost like on the back of your leg, like round there. That was the only time that I nearly cried. And I still didn't cry. Really didn't cry at all. This one was like a matching tattoo with one of my friends, and she cried and she had to squeeze my hand with it and all that sort of stuff. I was just like, whatever. You know, honestly, I can get tattoos and everything like that, and it doesn't hurt. I've got both my ankles done, which people say is really, really excruciatingly painful. I've got the inner wrist done, as I said, and people say that I've had a tattoo artist actually say to me, I've done full sleeves on these grown-ass burly men who will not get the inner wrist done because they say it hurts too much. And I'm just like, sitting there like, so how's your day? And I'm sitting there like, almost like I'm laughing. I'm literally like joking with this tattoo artist, and he's like, doesn't it hurt? And I was like, a bit, but like it doesn't hurt that much. He was like, you've got such a high pain tolerance. And I was like, thanks. You know, like it was weird, because as a kid I was always told I didn't have a high pain tolerance, and then getting this tattoo I was just like, whatever. And he was like, you've got such a high pain tolerance. And I was just like, thanks. You know, and I'm laughing through getting this tattoo, and I'm vividly remembering this as well in my head, and I'm just like, almost like this shouldn't, I had an unhealthy high pain tolerance, you know, when I think about it. The next symptom I'm going to talk about is I cried a lot as a kid. I didn't really understand my emotions, so I cried at every single emotion. I cried when I was angry, I cried when I was sad, I cried when I'd been bullied, I cried when I was happy even. I cried all the time. Like, and I was always seen as someone who's hypersensitive. I was always like, oh, she'll go and cry. Like, and to this day, there is times when I still will cry, like normally when I've been triggered, and there's times where I will cry just randomly, like when I'm, like, I think it's down to hormones now, but like, when I was younger, it was definitely something that I would cry at everything. Every single thing I would cry at. Like, you know, it was almost like a daily thing at this point. I would cry so much. And I was seen as someone who was very hypersensitive and very like emotional. And yeah, it was hard. It was hard because when I got to the point where I was crying and I just couldn't stop myself crying, there's been times even as an adult where I've been triggered, I've started crying, but I'm like, I don't know what to do. I can't stop crying, but I want to stop crying. And I'm just like, just give me 5. Let me calm down. And this happened actually when I was in America, and I was with some of our family friends, and I was actually staying at theirs. And something that the mum had said triggered me, and I don't even know what it was, but I started crying. And I think I was hormonal as well. I think I was due my period, and I think I was hormonal as well. And I was crying, and she couldn't understand why I was crying, and neither could I, but I also couldn't stop crying. So I had to just take 10 minutes, and she literally was like, why are you crying? Like, I've not done anything. And I'm like, it's not you. In between my tears, I was like, it's not you. I don't know what it is. I don't know why I'm crying. And I even said to her, I'm sorry for crying, but I don't know why I was crying. And she was just like, well, that was so strange. And I was like, yeah, it happens all the time. Like, I don't know if any of you can, like, relate to that. I'm trying to be more real in my videos, as you can see, and just say, like, this happened, and I don't know why I was crying. I couldn't stop myself crying. And it was weird. weird beyond belief. But anyway, so the next one I've got down, I have got notes, by the way, if I didn't say that at the beginning of this video, because I knew I was going to forget things. So I've got 3 more points, by the way. The next point is I didn't relate to children my own age. I have kind of touched on this at the beginning of this video, but I would talk to the teacher on duty rather than playing with kids my own age. I would struggle with any sort of activity that was not run by a teacher and it was solely done by like the kids, like playtimes and break times and stuff like that. I remember vividly in year 6 just walking around the netball courts. Like we were like year 5 and 6 was taken to the netball courts for play. We were given balls, we were given like skipping ropes and stuff like that, and we were told just to go and play. And the teacher would just like, there was 2 teachers usually on duty, and they would just look after us, look after the whole lot, right? And I remember vividly either talking to the teacher, or if they said, "Oh, can you go play?" I would literally just walk around the netball courts, walk around this double courted system. And if you went to a British primary school, you'll probably know what I mean. But I try and insert an image as well of what these courts will look like. But there was numerous times where I'd get hit in the head by a football because I'd be walking by the football courts where the boys were playing football. Like, you know, there was so many different things that would happen. And I'd go back to the teacher, but I've been hit in the head, and she's like, "Oh, well, you know, da 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 da. You know, we shouldn't be walking around the netball courts." As someone who works in a primary school now, if one of the kids, even in year 6, been hit by a football, we would have given like I bumped my head sticker, like we give them an ice pack. Like, it's such a different vibe now working at a school to being at a primary school. And these are both private schools, by the way. So I'm comparing a private school to a private school. I also want to add on to this that I didn't understand the more subtle bullying. So if someone shouted at me and called me a name, I understood that was bullying. But the more subtle bullying, that in hindsight, it took me years to understand that I was being bullied for this. So when I joined middle school, so year 7, I think I was like 12 at the time, this girl who I really wanted the attention of, and this girl who I really, really wanted to be friends with, she was like one of the more popular girls. She had a lot of medical issues, and I don't know whether that was a reason that I wanted to have someone to care for. I don't know whether that was a reason as well. But I really wanted to be her friend, but I didn't realise at the time she obviously didn't want to be mine. There was times where, like, there was one particular time in particular where she said to me, if I cut my hair to a bob, she would be my friend. And this was at a time where I had hair that I could sit on. And she said, if you cut your hair, I will be your friend. So I cut my hair, and I cut my hair from like bum length to like waist. So I had it up to here. So I had a good 8 to 10 inches off my hair. Then that wasn't good enough. So then I had my hair cut again, and I had it to shoulders. And that was a long bob. I had like a long bob done. And this is the kind of style this is the kind of length, I suppose, that I had it. And I love this sort of style now. But at the time, she looked at me, and I had my hair kind of like almost behind me like this, but with the little short strands at the front kind of hanging down, so it looked like I had a bob. She looked around the back of my head. She literally walked up to me, looked on the back of my head, saw my bob was slightly too long, and she was like, not short enough. Even though I had cut my hair from like sitting on my hair length to this sort of length in like 2 haircuts, that was not enough. And she wasn't my friend. She went from being my friend to not being my friend. Honestly, it was so off and on again. And I didn't understand that that was her basically saying, I don't want to be your friend. But I was so focused on trying to be her friend that it was insane. And in hindsight, it was like, why was I even trying? But as a kid, I was like, I want to be her friend. And she wasn't directly saying to me, I don't want to be your friend, or she wasn't very outwardly bullying me by calling me names. So it was hard for me to realise that was bullying. Anyway, moving on, the next one. I was always tired. And even to this day, I'm always tired. And I think this stems down to the need or want to mask my symptoms. So like when I'm at home, and not necessarily on camera, but when I'm at home, I will stim, which is actually, I'll put like a little description on like the screen as to what stimming is. But stimming is like a self-soothing behaviour for autistics. And my stims are very inward stims. They're not like the typical flapping your hands or anything like that, although there is some of that. But my flapping my hands isn't necessarily flapping my hands. If I am to stim more outwardly, it's more like a scrunching, like a tensing of my hands sort of stim rather than an actual like flap. I have flapped my hands before and I do find it very soothing, but it's not the stim that I would go to, if that makes sense. So a lot of the stims I go to at the moment is like feet movements, finger movements. Like I don't really go for like outward stims. And that's just the way that I've done. And I think that's something that's been ingrained in me because I wasn't allowed to stim as a kid or something like that. I don't really remember a lot of my childhood. Like, I don't remember before the age of 5. So it's very hard to know. And I don't really have any video footage or anything like that I can put in of me when I was that young. So I don't even know whether I did flap my hands as a kid. But I do remember making some movements, and whether it was flapping my hands, I don't remember whether it was or not. But I remember making some movements and being told, what you're doing, sort of thing. So yeah, but I was always tired, and I think that does kind of stem down to the not being allowed to be myself, and having to always mask, and always having to pretend, and always having to fit in with the general public. And I would usually get home, especially in high school, because high school it really ramped up. And in high school, I would go home and I'd have a nap because I honestly was so tired from the day that I was exhausted. I would get home and I'd have a nap. I'd have like a couple of hours nap. I'd then get up, I'd have dinner, and then go back to bed again. Or I would be up for maybe a couple of hours and then I'd go back to bed again. Like, I would sleep the whole way through the night as well. Like, I was a good sleeper as a teen because I was so exhausted. So exhausted of pretending, and so exhausted of having to try and fit in, that it was so difficult. So difficult. The last symptom I have is I always took everything to heart and believed everything. And this is something that I still struggle with to this day, because I believe everything. If I see something on TikTok, it's true. If I see something on YouTube, it's true. If I have someone say to me that this has happened, it's automatically true in my head. I struggle to believe that someone could lie, because I hate lying. Like, I do lie sometimes, and it's a complete myth that autistics cannot lie, because they can. But I struggle with like the bigger lies. Like, when you're on TikTok and they're making like these fake news articles or something like that, I struggle so much to believe that it's not true. Like, why would you make a fake news article if it's not true? Like, that is one of the issues I have with life in general, is struggling to believe that things are falsified, or things are elaborated, or things are, dramatized. Like, I even struggle with that. Like, unless it's obvious dramatization, like skits. I love watching skits. Like, skits are a really lovely form of, like, I don't know, easy to watch things, but hard to make. I've tried to make skits and they are so hard. And I think that's partly because I struggle with the imagination. So I struggle to imagine like what would happen in a scenario, and struggle to script things. But I would love to act them out if someone was to script them. It's one of those. So these are the childhood symptoms that I have thought of, and these are the childhood symptoms that I could think of right this second. If you are autistic, or you know someone who's autistic, and you've got any other symptoms that you would like to add that are childhood symptoms, the comment section is open down below if you would like to put any of your experiences down. These are obviously not symptoms that everyone experiences. These are my personal experience. So if you would like to add your own little sprinkle of experience, then feel free to in the description box down below. But that is it for today's video, and as I say at the end of every single one of my videos, I believe in you even if nobody else does, and I shall see you in my next one. Bye guys.
Just like you're young again, no, don't you cry. Just get back up again.